inside the International Space Station Flight Control Room here at the Johnson Space Center in Houston, Texas. This team here today is being led by Flight Director Brian Smith. The Capcom is veteran astronaut Anna Fisher. She's the one that you'll hear during this hour talking to the crew of Expedition 36 on board the International Space Station. It's been a busy start of the week for the crew up on board the orbiting complex. There was a spacewalk that took place yesterday with Fyodor Yurchikhin and Alexander Mazurkin, two of the Russian crew members, conducting a 6-hour, 34-minute spacewalk. The majority of the activities were to get ready for the upcoming brand new Russian multi-purpose laboratory module that's going to be coming up later on this year. That is actually going to replace the Pirs docking compartment, but everything went according to plan as these two crew members ventured outside and took care of all the activities that they needed to get ready for this brand new laboratory that's coming up here in just a few months. They installed some cable clamps, some handrails, and tested some rendezvous equipment outside the station. Yurchikhin and Mazurkin also swapped out a flow control valve that is part of the Zarya module. That was the first piece of the space station that was launched back in 1998. That valve is part of the coolant system of that particular laboratory. They also retrieved an experiment from outside. This was the 169th spacewalk in support of the International Space Station's assembly and construction. They now have a total of 1,067 hours and 43 minutes total to build this entire international research laboratory. The crew also has reopened the hatches in between the Albert Einstein ATV, that is the European cargo craft that is on the back end of the International Space Station back there on the right side of the screen. This docked back on June 15th and has brought up 7.3 tons of science experiments and supplies for the crew. The crew is actually way ahead of the timeline in terms of unloading ATV. They are basically taking about half the time that was planned to unload all of that cargo. They will pack it full of trash, and ultimately ATV will be undocked and deorbited down into the Earth's atmosphere. Chris Cassidy, Luca Parmitano now getting ready for their spacewalk coming up on July 9th. They will have another one on July 16th. They're going to be taking care of quite a number of items outside the space station. Each one of those spacewalks will last about 6.5 hours. They're going to be replacing a space-to-ground communications receiver, as well as replacing some wireless video equipment and installing some power and cables for that upcoming laboratory that's going to be part of the Russian segment of the International Space Station. So they will spend the majority of their day today taking a look at the procedures for those two spacewalks. They will have a conference call with the ground teams here in Houston to talk about what's ahead as they get ready for those two ventures outside the space station itself. Speaking of outside the station, the Dexter robot is getting ready for some activities and some trial runs later on this week. This is another Canadian robot outside the station. You can see it has 2 arms there. Each one of those arms is about 11 feet across. Dexter itself is about 12 feet high. But they're going to be retrieving some tools out of its tool belt today and then putting it through the paces later on this week. They're going to be testing some removal of some bolts and also opening up some doors outside the station in case Dexter ever needed to be used to replace some of the parts that are part of the station's power control outside. So they're going to be opening up the bay doors outside there and making sure that Dexter actually operates as expected. The crew also had a chance here just several days ago to take some pictures of the southern Colorado wildfires that are taking place down in that state. Quite a dramatic photo there of these wildfires. As of June 24th, which was yesterday, one of the largest fires there in that area has destroyed 75,150 acres as the firefighters there try to put out these fires that are threatening certain cities down there in Colorado. They're having a tough time dealing with this because of the winds, but the winds are expected to hopefully die down later on this week, and they should hopefully get most of those fires under control later on. The crew has several different crew Earth observations today. They're going to be flying over the Volga-Ural Delta, which is part of the Caspian Sea. Hopefully they'll be able to take some pictures of that. They're going to be flying over the island of St. Vincent down in the Caribbean, and also flying over parts of Phoenix, Arizona. Of course, if you would like to learn more or see some of these photos, including your hometown, just log on to eol.jsc.nasa.gov. Once again, eol.jsc.nasa.gov. www.jse.nasa.gov. Of course, you can always log on to the NASA website at www.nasa.gov/station. Take a look at what the crew is up to today and learn about all the science that they're taking care of up on board the International Space Station. This is Mission Control Houston. As we were talking about today, Chris Cassidy, Luca Parmitano getting ready for 2 spacewalks coming up here in just a few weeks, one on July 9th. And also one on July 16th. We're actually going to have a news conference coming up to take a look at those briefings. That news conference will take place on July 2nd at 1 p.m. Central Time, but that'll include David Korth, the spacewalk flight director, will be here in Houston, Ernest Bell, who will be the spacewalk officer for the spacewalk on the 9th, and Karina Eversley, who will be the spacewalk officer for July 16th. So once again, we will have a news conference here at the Johnson Space Center at 1 p.m. Central Time, 2 p.m. Eastern Time on July 2nd to take a look at those 2 spacewalks. This is Mission Control Houston, continuing to take a live view aboard the International Space Station as Chris Cassidy rotates down one of the massive racks that is part of the space station. These racks make up the majority of the inside of these modules themselves, but you get a sense of exactly how big they are. They're about the size of a phone booth, each one of them, but they hold different things such as the experiments on board, the computers that help run the station, and other different supply racks. Hi, everybody. Josh Byerly here inside Mission Control Houston. I'm joined by my friend Camille. Elaine, how are you doing, Camille?
I'm great, thank you.
You know, all this week we're talking about, and actually all this month, more appropriately, we're talking about the anniversaries of Valentina Tereshkova, who was the first female in space, and Sally Ride, who was the first American in space. One was 50 years ago, and one's 30 years ago. Who more appropriate to talk about it than you? You know, your background is quite extensive whenever it comes to your education. You've got a Bachelor of Science in Mechanical Engineering from Howard University, a Master of Science in Mechanical Engineering from Florida A&M University, Master of Science in Aerospace Engineering from University of Maryland, and a doctorate in Educational Leadership from University of Houston. So you've had some schooling in science.
Absolutely.
But I think what's even cooler, she's actually a private pilot, which is amazing to me. But whenever you look at these anniversaries, you know, what does it mean to you, and what are kind of your thoughts on it?
I think in the last 30 to 50 years, we've made significant strides, and we've come a long way with the inclusion of women in human spaceflight. To date, I think we've had about 57 women from diverse backgrounds, both cultural, social, different nationalities who have flown in space. From American perspective, since Dr. Sally Ride, we've had the first African-American woman, Dr. Mae Jemison in 1992, who flew. Our own Senate Director, Dr. Ellen Ochoa, who's the first Hispanic American woman to fly in space in 1993, and then the first Asian American woman in Dr. Kalpana Chawla, who flew in 1997 for the first time. We lost her in Colombia. But these women have really blazed a trail and inspired countless women who have come behind them and will for generations. From a global perspective, we've had a number of women who have flown in space from Japan, Canada, Europe, China, of course, Russia. And we've had an Iranian-American space tourist. So we've made significant strides, including women in human spaceflight.
You know, we try to always reach out to students and kids who are going into science. You know, whenever you take a look back at the school that you've gone through, you know, what made you pick the courses that you took, and when did you know?
I was really good in math and science in my early years of schooling, and I had a passion for aeroplanes,
Hmm.
for airplanes and aviation. I also was very passionate about space from an early age. I grew up in the Caribbean, a small island nation of Trinidad and
Hmm.
Tobago, and I remember at the age of 6 and 7 sitting on the trunk of my dad's car many nights and just being awe-inspired by the vastness of space, not really knowing what that was all about. But being really mechanical and analytical in my thinking, when I decided that I was going to go to college, of course, I decided to study aeronautical engineering because of my passion for airplanes. Um, but then when I migrated to the States as a freshman, and I'm dating myself, the Challenger accident happened,
Yeah.
and that just changed my life. Like in those moments, I decided this is what I wanted to do. So I switched from aeronautical engineering to aerospace engineering, and you read my bio, so
Yeah.
the rest is history. I've spent 18-year career designing rockets and spacecraft systems, both
Yeah.
for Department of Defense and NASA.
So whenever you talk to boys and girls that are going into, if they kind of have a hankering for science,
Hmm.
is that really the key? It's just for them to go with what interests them, what what their passion is, rather than trying to say, okay, the end of my career, I want to be here. Is it more important to say, well, here's what I really like to do, and is that the key?
Yes, it is the key. I think you have to follow the things that you're passionate about. Um, Specifically for girls, though, encouraging them to go into science requires exposure,
Hmm.
right? And so having opportunities as a high schooler to go and work in a lab alongside a professional scientist or researcher or engineer and getting that exposure and those opportunities to see what the real world of science and engineering is like has been shown to really sustain the interest of females continuing their careers in those areas.
So you work on the program science office.
I do.
Sort of the brain trust of all the science we've got going on board the orbiting laboratory. Whenever you take a look at it, you were talking about all the different legendary females that we've had.
Hmm.
One of them just walked back in the room. Anna Fisher's over there is our
Oh,
Capcom today. She's part of the original group of astronauts. But
hmm.
we've had dozens of astronauts that have flown up to the space station, females and males,
Hmm.
obviously. Peggy Whitson was a commander of the
Hmm.
space station back on expedition.
First woman commander.
Yeah. Whenever you take a look at the space station itself, and a lot of these PIs, the principal investigators, are females,
Hmm.
too, very diverse.
Hmm.
Whenever you look at the experiments, what do you think is probably the most promising thing that the space station offers for scientists and researchers, and all the things that are going on and what they're working on?
I think it's the amazing discoveries and breakthroughs that we have had and continue to have on the space station.
Yeah.
All the biological, chemical, and physical processes that are a function of our terrestrial environment is a function of the gravitational force, right? Our ecosystem functions because of that gravitational force. And so when you take that variable out of the equation, then amazing things happen to those same processes, both in biology, chemistry, and physics. And so the space station really serves as a platform for us to do the investigations in those areas and see what those changes are,
Yeah.
and have those discoveries and breakthroughs that we didn't know really could happen or exist. And a perfect example of that is microbial virulence. When we flew the salmonella bacteria, and as a result of the microgravity environment, it became more virulent, or the disease causing potency increased. And so researchers also were able to identify the genetic pathway that caused that virulence. And so they, as a result, potentially could develop vaccines for those bacteria causing diseases that will have an impact on our life here on Earth. Another one is after 40 or 50 years of human spaceflight, we recently discovered the vision degradation of
Nice. Yeah.
astronauts. And so just recently we started that investigation called Ocular Health, examining how that vision degrades during long duration space flights. And so all these investigations, in addition to the countermeasures that researchers develop as a result, will have significant impacts and benefits to improving the quality of our life here on Earth.
So last question is kind of a big one. Out of all the things we've done on the space station, what is your favorite experiment? You may have to explain what it is, but what's your favorite
I
experiment?
have two.
Okay, I'll give you two.
The first is AMS, the Alpha Magnetic
Okay.
Spectrometer, which is the largest particle physics detector in space. And up to date, it's been up there for almost 2 years, and
Yeah.
it's gotten over 16 billion hits of
Yeah.
cosmic rays.
There it is.
And so that instrument and the data we get from that instrument could answer the question of what is the origins of our universe. And from a physical and spiritual perspective, I think human beings are curious about that. How did we evolve? And so I think the results from that experiment and that investigation is really, really promising. The second one is Sally Ride EarthCam,
Yeah.
developed by Dr. Sally Ride, and it's one of the longest running investigations. It first started back in Expedition 2.
Yeah.
And what she facilitated was the opportunity for middle school students to be able to program the EarthCam camera that's on board the space station to take images of various geological features of our Earth and use that in their studies of science, of math, of pre-engineering, geography, social studies, and history. And it's one of our global education programs. So we've been able to reach countless millions of students around the world just with that investigation. So that's really one of my favorites.
Well, even if Sally Ride would have never been the first American female in space, that is
A huge
that is quite a
contribution.
legacy
Yes,
to leave to students,
absolutely.
and they touch it, all the time. So
Absolutely.
I think that's probably one of my favorite ones too.
Yeah.
So thanks for joining us, Camille. Always
Thank you.
always good to talk
Thanks
to you.
to be
So,
with you.
Camille Elaine, if you would like to learn more about the office that Camille works in, which is the Program Science Office, and all the experiments that they help run on board the International Space Station, just log on to the NASA website at www.nasa.gov/station. Take a look at the left-hand side of the page under Research and Technology, and you can take a look at all the different experiments that the crews are working on every day. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
This is Mission Control Houston. This team here inside the flight control room continuing to watch along as the crew on board the space station itself works through their daily activities. There's quite a bit of science taking place today, including the capillary channel flow experiment, which you're taking a look at here. If you've ever watched this here on Space Station Live, you know that capillary flow is something that many of the crews have taken a look at. It is the phenomena that you find here on Earth as water tends to move up different types of surfaces, like up test tubes and things such as that. The reason they look at all these different types of capillary flow phenomena is to hopefully help in the future new ways of transporting liquids. Right now you have to have some sort of pump or propulsive system or something like that to actually move fluids. But the hope is that you can actually harness the power of capillary flow and move liquids such as fuels, low temperature liquids like liquid nitrogen and water and things such as that in microgravity without having to pump it. This would obviously reduce cost, it would save on weight, and would improve reliability of the equipment needed for it, which of course would benefit future spaceflight as we go longer distances out there toward asteroids and eventually onto Mars one of these days. But the principal investigator for this particular capillary channel flow experiment is the University of Bremen. That is Michael Dreyer out there in Germany. And there's also some co-investigators also at the University of Bremen and also Portland State University here in Oregon. This is just one of the many experiments that the crew is working on today, both themselves and also being ground controlled, as we talked about earlier during the broadcast. Just log on to the NASA website at nasa.gov/station and look at the research and technology selection there on the left-hand side of the page. And you can take a look at the experiment list to find out what the crew is working on. You can actually break it down according to experiment name in alphabetical order. You can also take a look at experiments by expedition. You can also take a look at the major categories of experiments, including biology, earth and space science, educational activities, human research, physical sciences, and also technology. Right now, the crew is in the middle of taking a look at the procedures that are going to be involved in the two spacewalks coming up on July 9th and July 16th. Chris Cassidy and Luca Parmitano will be the spacewalkers for both of those activities outside the station. They're going to be doing quite a number of different activities out there. We're going to have a briefing here at the Johnson Space Center on July 2nd to take a look at it. That will air at 1 p.m. Central Time, 2 p.m. Eastern, live here on NASA television with David Korth, who will be the flight director for both of those. Ernie Bell, who is going to be the spacewalk officer for the first one, and Karina Eversley, who will be the spacewalk officer for the second one. Each one of those spacewalks will last 6.5 hours. They're going to be outside replacing a space-to-ground communications receiver, replacing wireless video equipment, and installing power and cables for that Russian multi-purpose laboratory module that's going to be coming up later on this year. The Pirs docking compartment, which has been up on the space station for a number of years, will be basically jettisoned, and we'll say farewell to the International Space Station. This multi-purpose laboratory module will be replacing it. It is going to give them quite a bit more space in the Russian segment, an area to conduct experiments, and a docking port for visiting vehicles. Chris Cassidy continuing to work there in the vicinity of the Unity module. That was the first U.S. piece of the International Space Station that went up and joined the Zarya module. Zarya was launched in November of 1998. Unity went up on board Space Shuttle Endeavour just a few weeks later in December of 1998. Those two pieces had never even been on the same side of the Earth, but they did go together flawlessly up there to start the International Space Station. And of course, it has expanded considerably over the last 15 years or so. Weighs about 1 million pounds now and is bigger than a football field. But as we talked about, Cassidy, as well as Luca Parmitano and Pavel Vinogradov, all three of those will have a conference call later on today with the ground teams here in Houston. As we mentioned, they're taking a look at the procedures for those upcoming spacewalks, and they will be talking with the teams that will be overseeing those spacewalks here in Houston later on today. That will take pretty much the rest of their afternoon.
I had cotton and woolen socks on my feet. Okay? Copy that.
Федор, к тебе вопрос.
Now, Fedor, I have a question to you.
Ты в этот раз использовал
This time
видеокамеру
you
и закрывал
use
верхний
video
иллюминатор.
camera
Это
and
доставляло какие-то неудобства?
close the
Или
upper
ты особо на это
window.
внимание не обращал?
This is Mission Control Houston. This is footage from earlier inside the Quest airlock as Chris Cassidy, Luca Parmitano replace some parts of the spacesuits that they will wear coming up on July 9th and July 16th. Cassidy is going to be the lead spacewalker for these upcoming activities outside. He's going to be wearing a suit with red stripes. This will be the 5th and 6th spacewalks of his career, and Parmitano is going to be doing the first one of his. He's going to have the suit with the white stripes. We are continuing to take a look at footage from earlier today as Chris Cassidy, Luca Parmitano worked inside the Quest airlock. They're getting their spacesuits ready to go for the July 9th and July 16th spacewalks that they will both be conducting. As a reminder, we have a news conference coming up from here at the Johnson Space Center on July 2nd to take a look at those two spacewalks. That'll air at 1 p.m. Central Time, 2 p.m. Eastern Time. Our live coverage of the spacewalks will begin at 6 a.m. Central Time on both days. Again, that'll be 6 a.m. Central Time, 7 a.m. Eastern Time. The spacewalks themselves will begin a little after 7 o'clock Central, about 7:10 Central Time, 8:10 a.m. Eastern Time. So again, live coverage begins on July 9th and 16th at 6 a.m. Central Time. And both spacewalks will start about the same time at about 7:10 a.m. Central Time, or 8:10 a.m. Eastern Time on both days.
But mostly I felt comfortable, and I didn't, feel any problem with that. Okay? So you regulated in such a way that you were quite comfortable and you didn't feel any discomfort. Correct? So you didn't have a feeling that you perspired or something like that? No. I never felt perspired, overheated, or very cold. Yes, it was a couple of times that it was cool. Closer to cold, but again, it wasn't, a big discomfort for me. All right. And when I egressed, and when I exited from the spacesuit, I didn't feel that I was wet. Okay, copy that. And now the undergarment was personal this time. So did it feel all right for you? Yes, it was absolutely fine. Absolutely fine. Okay, thank you. So for the next TV, we will again have a similar set of undergarments. Right now, you should have two sets of undergarments on board. As for the set number 3, I will have to clarify when it is slated for delivery on the station. Okay. We will try to look for, maybe we will, the additional assessment, maybe we will be able to find another set. Well, I know there are lots of undergarments, but usually the sizes are...
This again is a look at the photo that we showed you at the beginning of the broadcast. This is a picture that the Expedition 36 crew members took on board the International Space Station at an altitude of about 250 miles above the Earth. These are some of the wildfires that are happening in the state of Colorado, southern Colorado to be exact. This was taken back on June 19th, just a few days ago. Those fires have increased in size a little bit since that time. They've burned about 75,150 acres since then. This is the West Fork fire that we're talking about, but the firefighters and the communities themselves down there on the ground are having a bit of a rough go in terms of trying to put out these fires because of the winds that are in the area, but they're expected to die down later on this week, and hopefully they can get some of those fires under control. If you would like to take a look at this picture or any of the photos that the crew has taken, just go to eol.jsc.nasa.gov. Once again, eol.jsc.nasa.gov.
How much water should be left? Yes, I understand, because the EV was intense. We translated a lot. That's why a lot of water was used. Now, about drink, potable water in your drink bags, did you use it? Oh, yes, we did. You can say that. So you drank it, to the end? Yes. It was with lemon, a little bit added. So it was quite tasty. And it was very nice to drink it. Very pleasant. Okay? Good?
Ну, в принципе,
So, in essence, that's it. I asked all the questions I had. Do you have any suggestions or any comments or questions? Gena, I asked you to send us a radiogram on all the EVA issues. Yes, it is, prepared already. So one file has all that they had in their database. So one file contains everything. Does it suit you? Yes, absolutely. It suits me. Yes. Okay, good. Then I will tell them to uplink it on board. Thank you. Any other questions? No more questions. Diana, thanks a lot for your support and for your recommendations and for, the spaces themselves. Our big regards and gratitude to this dam. Actually,
this is Mission Control Houston. We're getting ready to wrap up Space Station Live for today. Of course, we'll be back tomorrow at 10 a.m. Central Time, 11 a.m. Eastern Time here on NASA TV. For the remainder of today, the crew's got a few wrap-up tasks to take care of. There is the entire crew. You see there on the left-hand side, Alexander Mazurkin. This is actually his first flight in space as he becomes a member of Expedition 36. There, second from the left, is Pavel Vinogradov. This is his third flight. He flew on the Soyuz TM-26, which was also part of Expedition 13. Chris Cassidy there in the middle. This is his second flight after being part of STS-127. And then, of course, Luca Parmitano there standing beside Cassidy. This is his first flight as well. He'll become the first Italian to walk in space coming up on July 9th and 16th as he steps outside with Cassidy. They are finishing up the procedure review for that activity later on today. Fyodor Yurchikhin there, second from the right. This is his fourth flight. He was part of STS-112, Expedition 15, and Expeditions 24 and 25. And then Karen Nyberg there on the far right-hand side. This is her second flight after being part of STS-124. That mission was on board Discovery. They delivered the Kibo laboratory to the International Space Station. So quite a crew there as they work through the remainder of their day. Of course, for the latest, just logging on to the NASA website at www.nasa.gov/station for all the updates on what the crew is up to and what is ahead in terms of science and research for the remainder of this week. Again, we will be back tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. Central Time, 11 a.m. Eastern Time for tomorrow's Space Station Live here on NASA Television. Until then, this is Mission Control Houston.